In 1943, Shirley Lewis boarded a steamer headed to Seward, Alaska, to begin a secretarial job with the Army Corp of Engineers. On board, she met Bill Gordon, a newly minted deacon of the Episcopal Church. By July, they were married and off to Point Hope, where she got off the plane in high heels. Not long after that, Bill Gordon was tapped to be the Bishop of all Alaska, and Shirley Gordon spent the next 25 years in Fairbanks as wife of the young flying Bishop of all Alaska, who was seldom home for long. Shirley maintained an open-door policy for overnight guests, and over the years, she hosted hundreds of people to all mealtimes, all the while raising 4 children. Following the death of her husband, Shirley returned to Fairbanks. Please help me welcome Shirley Gordon.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, that's it.
Yeah, that's it. We're done.
Sorry.
See, that wasn't so hard. Okay, no. Let's start. Where did you grow up?
Oh, well, I was born in Eugene, Oregon. My father was a captain in the U.S. Army and hoped to make his career in the Army. He was in charge of the ROTC at the University of Oregon. But we decided to cut back the military, and he was let go. So I spent some time in various places. He had to find jobs. So I had my first grade in Portland, Oregon, where he was working at that time with the some paper mill there, Crown Zellerbach, I think it was called. Anyway, how much of that did you want to know? Should I go on from there? There's a lot of years here.
Yeah. How many siblings?
I could tell you that. Pardon?
How many siblings?
I have one sister, my baby sister. She's 3 years younger than I am. She's only 96. And we're as different as can be. I came off to Alaska. She stayed in our hometown. She visited me twice in Alaska for 2 long weekends during the over 50 years I've been here. But I get out there often. So.
Now, you, as we mentioned at the top, you took a steamer up to Seward with a friend. You were trying to save money for college, is that right?
That was true. I grew up in Longview, Washington, actually. By the time of 4th grade, I was in Longview, where Daddy had a job. And I went through high school and junior college there. And I wanted to go to the University of Oregon, of course, for the next 2 years. And because I lived on the other side of the Columbia River, in Longview, I had to pay out-of-state tuition, which we could not afford, so I needed a job. And I had a friend who was working for the Army Engineers at the time and being transferred to Anchorage. And her mother was not very happy about her going to the territory by herself. So I applied for a job, and sure enough, I got the job. But there weren't 2 jobs in Anchorage, so there were 2 jobs in Seward, so that's why we ended up in Seward.
Well, it must have been kismet because you met your future husband on board.
Yes, but I was seen off at the docks in Seattle to the SS Yukon by my father and my boyfriend. So before we left the dock, this handsome young man from North Carolina, who was wearing a clerical collar at the time and introducing himself to all the women on board, offering his services. And so we met right away then. And I like to say that, well, Jean and I were keeping a diary together, And I've always said that she wrote in the diary that very first day we met Bill, Shirley has met the man she's going to marry. Well, she didn't say that at all. I just got the book from her the other day, and I wrote, Shirley Gordon has a nice ring to it. Not expecting anything at all. I mean, we were so different. I didn't know nothing about the Episcopal Church. I was a Christian. I think you're going to ask that question.
Well, I was going to ask you, considering you eventually became an Episcopal missionary,
yeah.
So you didn't have any formal ties with the church before you met?
I didn't know anything about the Episcopal Church. I was a Christian. I'd been baptized by immersion in the first Christian church in Longview, Washington, when I was 12. When I got to high school and they told me dancing was a sin, I said, bye-bye. And I hadn't been to any church till I met Bill Gordon, and then, of course, I went right to his church when we got to Seward.
Well, now, I think elsewhere I heard you say it was love at first sight. What was your first impression?
The what? What did you say?
Your first impression of him?
Oh, he was charming.
Charming?
He was Southerner, for one thing. He had this lovely drawl, and handsome and Southern. That's what he was. I was a girl from the Pacific Northwest.
Did you know much about Alaska?
Did I know much about Alaska? No, I knew where it was. But anyway, to go to Alaska at that time, it was World War II, and you couldn't come to Alaska, to the territory, unless you were already a resident here or unless you were necessary to the defense. I was necessary to the defense as a clerk typist in Seward, Alaska. And anyway, we got well acquainted on those 10 days, I think, in a blacked out boat.
And you went to visit him at
Seward.
the church, I understand, when you...
Well, yes, of course. When Gene and I, Bill loved this because he got to Alaska before I did. Because my friend had measles on board and we could not get off the ship until the doctor had come and cleared her. So Bill got here a day before I did.
In this time of COVID, you're saying you were quarantined?
Well, yeah, we were on ship anyway. So that was the next thing. And then when we got there, we had no place to stay. So we found a bedroom with a bath above the a store on the main street. I can't think now. Hardware store is what it was. I can't remember the name of the people, but anyway, that's what we had: a bedroom and a bath. And I couldn't very well entertain a young man there. So I spent a lot of time at the rectory. We were well chaperoned because the church had rented out bedrooms to 3 men. So, and we got very well acquainted.
Wow. So I said by July you two had married. Now, how did that come about?
Oh, you're skipping so fast. I say we were getting acquainted. I went to his church. Oh, I need to tell you a little story about going to his church. The Episcopal Church has a prayer book, and I read in that prayer book the 23rd Psalm, and I had never understood why people like the 23rd Psalm. It starts out, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." And it goes on to say, "He maketh me do this and maketh me do the other thing." So when I read it in the Episcopal book, it said, "The Lord is my shepherd, therefore shall I lack nothing." Now that makes sense. So right away I was for the Episcopal Church. Yeah.
You were converted on the spot.
yeah. No, I forgot your question.
Well, the assignment to Point Hope, was that what sparked the marriage in July?
Oh, that certainly did. We were already at that stage where you're talking about your future together, And we would be in Seward together for a year, and I would go out to the University of Oregon for 2 years, and he would stay at his job there, and maybe eventually we'd get together sometime. Well, then Bishop Bentley came down from Nenana, where he lived, because he traveled the villages in the interior by river, in an outboard motorboat, by the way. And it was a 3-day trip to come down to visit Bill by train. In those days, you stayed in Curry, you stayed in Anchorage, you got to Seward. So he came to Seward and asked Bill if he'd be willing to go to Point Hope to fill out the rest of his 3 years. Bill's story is that when he told me the bishop wanted him to go to Point Hope, I said, "Not without me." And I very well could have said that by then, and that's exactly what happened. He decided to go to Point Hope, and I went with him.
And so the bishop married you, and?
Yes, in Seward. And I told you already that you couldn't come to Alaska unless you were necessary to the defense. And my father was stationed in Alaska at the Excursion Inlet near Juneau, so he could come to the wedding. But nobody else in my family could. And Bill liked saying that he was married when he knew nobody at the wedding ceremony for more than 4 months, including the bride. So he liked that story. But anyway, we were married, and there's a little something I want to tell you, because I had said I wanted to marry a man who did not drink alcohol. Now that limits the field, I want you to know. And so here was a Whiskeypalian who didn't drink alcohol. Isn't that good? Yeah. So then my father, who knew how I felt about alcohol, at the reception drank a toast to me at the officers' club with coffee. And I always appreciated that.
What a nice gesture.
Yeah.
Now, the trip to Point Hope must have been memorable.
Well, first we had to have the trip to Nenana, which was something. We got to Anchorage, and in those days, Anchorage had about 1,500 people, and the edge of town was 8th and F, where we had an Episcopal church, All Saints. So then, anyway, the bishop went with us on our honeymoon for 3 days on the train to get back to Nenana, where St. Mark's Mission, Bill was ordained a priest, and I was confirmed as an Episcopalian.
And so that took place in Nenana. So you got the imprimatur then to head to Point Hope. Did you go down river and then up the coast, or did you fly?
We flew a Cygwing to Point Hope. We stopped in, I can't remember if it was Hughes or Hooslia, but along Kaika, and then in Kotzebue, and landed. And you already told them I was in my honeymoon attire. I had my shoes on that had heels. And they say that to this day, the marks of my heels are still in the tundra at Point Hope. But anyway, it was an interesting trip because we got to Point Hope, and Point Hope is a sand spit. In fact, I think the name of Point Hope in their language is Tikiak, which means forefinger. So Point Hope was just on this little strip of land in the ocean, and when we got there, the fog had come in and there was no place for Sig to land. So we landed a few miles before the village on a sand spit, and we piled all of our things into an umiak, which is a skin boat, walrus skin boat that people had made, and we got in it, and the dog team ran along the shore pulling the boat, and a 14-year-old girl ran all the way to the village behind the dog team in gravel. That was a little Eskimo girl. Haven't forgotten that.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But we did get well, of course, Bishop Bentley got the real reception because he was their bishop, and they were very glad to see him, but they were kind to welcome us too.
Yeah. So I think your husband described your first place there as a California bungalow. I'm having trouble with that.
Well,
so tell me what that was all about.
Well, I will tell you, that's interesting to me because I'm really proud of the Episcopal Church. There was one boat a year, Coast Guard cutter, I think, I can't remember that, but the captain there saw the terrible things that white people had done to village people. I think mostly whalers, perhaps. So Point Hope, he went back to his church, the Episcopal Church, and said, we need to do something for these people. And so the Episcopal Church sent not a priest, but a medical doctor to be the first person from the Episcopal Church to go to that village. And then when he arrived, they were not happy to see another white man, thank you very much. So he was let up on the other side of the spit with this prefabricated house that he had to put together by himself and get up. It was a 2-story frame building. When everybody in the village was living in igloos, well, we all live in igloos, it just means you're home. But they lived in sensible places. They lived underground and with sod blocks, not blocks of snow. They looked like blocks of snow and the snow was on them, and there they were sensibly. When the wind blew, and it blows, the wind today was nothing compared to the wind at Point Hope. It would blow 50-gallon drums across like they were cardboard. And you may have heard of Hudson Stuck because he was the one who arranged the first climbing of Denali. Though Walter Harper was the first to really reach the top, but Hudson Stuck had traveled by dog team to Point Hope, and he'd written a book about 10,000 miles by dog team or something, and Bill had read it before we went to Point Hope. And Hudson Stuck said when he was in that house, it was so cold that he put up his tent in the bedroom and heated it with a propane stove. So we were looking forward to living in that house at Point Hope.
But it sounds like you two had a wonderful time there and you loved being there.
Yes, sir, we'd be there still. It was our plan to stay there forever. And Bill was so glad that that was his first church to be, because, well, very few people in the village at that time, this is 1943 to 48, spoke English. And so his sermons were all translated. That's not the word I want, but anyway, interpreted. And so he was right out of school with all this book learning. He had a lot to tell people, you know. He had to make it simple to the point, and he was forever grateful that that happened. And another thing is that he thought right away it was wrong that he was the priest. The interpreter should have been the priest. The man who spoke the language, had lived there all his life, who had been trained well by clergy for years. But the Episcopal Church prides itself that the clergy are so well educated. They not only have 4 years of college, they have 3 years of seminary. And so no way they could have a local man be the priest.
Well,
So-
we're going to talk about his championing Alaska Native priests and deacons as well as women ordained. But before we do that, it sounds as if, though, you two were wide open to their culture and you were educated as much as you two went to minister. Do I have that right?
I was educated as what?
They they took you under their wing and taught you.
Well, that was another thing that Bill said. We came to teach the people, and they taught us. And that was so true. We learned the way to care for one another. The whole village, they cared for one another. If one got a whale and nobody else got it, they shared it throughout the whole village. If some woman had too many children and another one didn't have enough, that child went. They were wonderful people. And I call them Eskimo. I know a lot of people don't want to be called Eskimo anymore. It has a derogatory term in their mind, but to me, and the Eskimo people at Point Hope were the finest people on the face of the earth. There were just nobody. We wanted to live with them. We wanted to stay with them. And then our bishop left, and we needed a new bishop in the missionary district of Alaska. And I was terrified that Bill would be chosen. And he assured me, no, he couldn't be chosen. He wasn't old enough. You had to be 30, and he was 29. Don't worry. Well, at Point Hope in those days, there was, we got our mail 4 times a year, 3 times by dog team, once by that boat I told you about. The only way we could hear from anybody was by telegram, and it went through the school. There was a school there. And they talked to the doctor in Kotzebue once a day, but that was what we knew about the outside world. So Bill was off on the dog team trip to Kivalina, which was south of us, and it's a 2-day trip, so he's spending the night in a cabin. And when the message came, and I got it, that Bill had been chosen Bishop of Alaska. So when he got home, I had the happy job of telling him he had been elected bishop. And he said, no way, there's no way I can be the Bishop of Alaska. My only experience has been right here for 5 years. I cannot be the bishop. And I'm sorry to tell you that I'm the one that said, Bill, we prayed that God would choose the person to be our bishop, and you were chosen. You're going to tell God you're not going to be the bishop? Why did I do that? We could still be at Point Hope. But no, we had to leave. And, very sad day.
Well, a couple of things before we get you to Fairbanks, where you spend a quarter of a century. First off, is that Parky from Point Hope?
It is, but it comes a little later in the tale. If you don't mind, I wait.
No.
It's a more recent thing. I do want to tell you about it, but yeah, no, Point Hope was, we learned a lot. Bill learned to go by dog team by himself. People had to teach him how to do that.
Well, and they kind of watched out for him too, right?
Oh, there was one time particularly. But let me tell you they taught him how to take care of dogs. They taught him how to get seal meat to feed the dogs. They taught him, how to run the dogs, they taught him everything he needed to know. They went with him to start with, and then he went off by himself. And for me, when he went off by himself for days on end in the dog team, there was no communication, no way to know where he was, if he was all right. It's not like today when you have your cell phone, but so he was gone, and then he came back. And where am I now?
Well, but we're almost to Fairbanks, but I do want to acknowledge that your first of your children was born, Panine, right?
Yes.
And
oh dear.
Oh dear.
Oh dear. This is where I had 2 children while I lived at Point Hope, a girl and a boy. And for the first one, I went home to Mama because I had left for a year when I left her, and because her husband had gone off to war and she was home alone. So I went home and had Panine. Then Billy was born on furlough. It was after our 3 years were up. We came outside for a while, so he was born then, also in Longview, Washington. And neither one of them have ever forgiven me. I know they're hearing this.
Well, let's gloss over that then and get you to Fairbanks.
And I could have had either child in the village. There were women there who could help me, and they would have worked. But I didn't.
What were your first impressions of Fairbanks when you arrived?
Well, it was a small town when I arrived in 1948. We went first to Nenana, where the former bishop had lived. We were there for a few months, and then in May we flew out to Raleigh, North Carolina for him to be consecrated bishop before we came back. And then when they came back, we decided to live in Fairbanks. Travel was easier now to get around. Although Bill inherited a boat, not an outboard motorboat, but a cabin cruiser, I'll call it. 2 people could sleep in it. And he used that boat to travel to visit the villages along the rivers for 2 years. And it took all summer to visit the villages along the rivers. And he had villages in southeastern Alaska and villages in the Arctic coast to visit too. So that's when he decided he thought it would be a good idea to learn to fly. And he bought the house that had been Noel Ween's house. And that was on the edge of town. That was right where the airfield was, Weeks Field. That was the edge of town for Fairbanks in those days. It was a small town. I didn't want to be here, but I wanted to be back at Point Hope. But then came the time, well, I'm rushing.
Well, let me ask you about that flying, because he's known as the Flying Bishop, and that wonderful installation at the Morris Thompson Center acknowledges the plane and his contributions to the state. You must have been worried. Were you worried about him piloting? Because he had a number of incidents, right?
Yeah, he doesn't like them called crashes. He didn't really crash. He broke a lot of landing gear. For one thing, there were no landing fields. I think Fort Yukon and Kotzebue and Tanana had fields, I think, but everywhere else he went, he landed on gravel bars, and in the winter he could land on the ice, but that's what he had, skis and wheels on that airplane to land. The FAA got to know me very well because I would call them and I'd say, "Do you have any idea where my husband is?" "He's in 4160 Whiskey." Well, yes, they would be very kind and tell me. And one time I called to ask where he was, and they said, "Well, he's stuck in Valdez, I think that's right, stuck there." And I said, "Well, why can he be stuck there?" And he said, "Well, they had 6 feet of snow." And I said, "You mean 6 inches?" "No, we mean 6 feet." But you know, there weren't cell phones, there weren't, phones, so, but the FAA kept good track of him for me.
It's nice to have a federal agency for that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you, I read somewhere, I think, that in just 1 year, 365 days, you had 465 house guests. So all this time, you're also raising your kids, as we mentioned at the start. Give me a picture of your life during this time.
I had a wonderful life. I had a wonderful life, and those house guests were people that wanted to be there. They were part of the family. In fact, you would be chopping the walnuts for me, or you would be washing the dishes for me, or you would be... I was not entertaining as such. I really enjoyed everybody that came, and a lot of them were missionaries that were living out in villages and had come in to have babies, or they were coming through town on their way somewhere else. And but it was interesting. At one time, I had the presiding bishop, and that's the High Muckety Muck, who lives in the National Church office in New York City, and he and his wife came to visit. Well, there really weren't. I think there was the Nordale Hotel at the time. We could have put them in the hotel. No, they're going to stay where everybody else stays. They're going to stay with Shirley. And so we sent some child out of his or her bedroom and put them in there. And it just happened that at that same time, we had a group of young people from somewhere in the United States who'd come to help us out. And so they were all in the house, sleeping on hide-a-beds in the living room or on the floor or something. And this presiding bishop went back and said, Bishop Gordon needs a building to house people when they come through town. So yes, he got that building with an office. Before, his office was in the church building downtown. Or before that, it was in our house. But because it hadn't been a bishop here, they'd been in Nana. But I think that was... No, I loved that life. I think I told you that I was a pretty young bishop's wife, too, and I had no experience as a clergy wife except in an Eskimo village for 5 years. So when I'd go to the meetings, the national meetings that bishops had, and their wives came with them, and the wives would get together, and the wives would talk about how they mentored the priest wives. I'm not going to mentor anybody. I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell them how to be a priest's wife. I wasn't, so I could be a friend. And that's the way I felt about the people who stayed with me. We were friends. And it was fun.
Well, he received national attention for being the youngest Episcopal bishop, I believe, ordained, and also for his flying.
Well, that youngest part, I loved that because I teased him many times about they never did that again.
They learned their lesson.
No, he was the youngest, yes. Yeah.
But more locally, I think he is really known for being a champion, as we mentioned earlier, for Alaska Native ordination, and also to the diaconate and then to the priesthood.
And for women's ordination.
And for women's ordination. So tell me what that battle, or if it wasn't really a battle, what that work entailed.
Well, you had to change the canons of the church. That's all. And he was not the only one. I mean, he had other people that agreed with him that, well, one thing, Bill had 6 sisters. He was the only boy in the family. His father was an Episcopal priest. His mother taught Bible. His sisters, of the 6, one was a missionary through the Anglican Church, which is our mother church, to India. One had married a Presbyterian minister, and they were missionaries in Brazil. And there was another one. Oh, she was teaching, you like this, she was teaching Bible in the public school in North Carolina. Yeah. So he knew women could do the job, and went to bat for them. When I came into the church, women couldn't be on vestries, they couldn't attend meetings, girls couldn't be acolytes. I mean, women, The one thing the women could do, which I thought was rather important, was teach the children, but not the other. Could not
Doesn't
be,
it always
could not
strike you
be
as a
ordained.
little odd that you would entrust your youngest to them, but no one else?
Yeah, right. It was. So he was among those who got that changed. And the other thing that I like now that that he was able to get through was what we call a sacramentalist priest. And that means that you didn't have to have 4 years of college and 3 years of seminary to be ordained. You could be ordained in order to consecrate the bread and the wine so people could have communion. And they could do that in the village, which was helpful. And as I say, he wasn't the only bishop that felt that way. Others had the same kind of experience.
Well, he's justly celebrated. Now, 25 years is a long time to serve as bishop. And are there outstanding stories or events that happened in that time,
Oh my
Shirley?
goodness, I'm sure there were, but let me think. It wasn't unusual here. The first bishop, Bill was the third bishop. The first one was Bishop Peter Trimble Rowe. He came to the territory of, I've forgotten how the gold miners came. He came with them, and he crafted his own boat, made it, and came across. I can't think of the term right now, but and he was bishop. I can't tell you how many years, but probably that many. And Bishop Bentley had been bishop for many years, so it wasn't too unusual.
So it's not that unusual.
It wasn't too unusual for him, well, at that time. But after 26 years, he was chosen. The people of Alaska had nothing to say about his being selected bishop, because there was no mechanism for them to get together and vote on anybody or know anybody or any way for it to be done in those days. But by now, after 26 years, people could meet in conventions, and they could know clergy, and they could choose their own bishop. And so he felt it was time for him to let that happen, which he did, and I had to agree he was right. He needed to get out of Alaska because he had been the bishop. He was the bishop. People called him bishop, and he was the bishop. And so it'd be hard for a new man to come in and be the bishop. So here I was, leaving a place I loved again. And it was hard on me. It was even harder on our youngest daughter, who was just a freshman in high school here. And so we thought we were doing the right thing by her. This was Anna, and we put her in a church boarding school. Figured she could finish out her 3 years there in Portland, Oregon, close to her grandparents, about 45 miles away. Well, that didn't work. The first year. It wasn't really a boarding school. It was a church school, and it had 4, 5, or 6 boarders, and anyway, it wasn't a good situation. So by this time, when we had left Alaska, and Bill was working for the National Church, teaching about lay ministry. He maintained that lay people can do anything a priest can do except the communion and absolution, and lay people ought to be doing some of the things that the priest was expected to do. And so he called that Teach Each a Ministry, T-E-A-M. So he traveled all around the world.
Yeah,
he
became an ambassador of sorts.
For 2 years for that.
Yeah.
So he was gone. I was, the first year I stayed on Vashon Island in the home, summer home of friends. I had it for the winter, that first year. And then the second year, Anna came there. And then the third year, he decided he would be an assistant bishop somewhere, and I guess let it be known he'd be glad to be an assistant, anybody wanted him. And he did agree that of the people that would take him as an assistant, I should have the choice where we went, which was a good thing, because he was invited to be the assistant bishop in Florida, in Arkansas, in Michigan. Guess what I chose? Being from the Pacific Northwest in Alaska, we went to Michigan, and that was a good choice.
Well, you were there a number of years.
Turned out that till he died.
Yeah.
But poor Anna, she was in a different school in a different state all 4 years of her high school. But it wasn't all that bad. She married a man she met and a senior in high school. Not till she was 30, but anyway, well, I have a little story to tell. Here I was in Michigan, my choice, home alone, because Bill was off doing his thing, Anna was in school doing her thing. I'm there alone, not knowing a soul, feeling so sorry for myself. And I looked out the window of my kitchen, and there on a snowy bough was a bright red cardinal. We didn't have cardinals growing up in Washington and Oregon. We didn't have cardinals in Alaska. Here was a cardinal. And I said right then, okay, God, I can be happy here. So I was happy there, but eager to get back. When Bill retired, we were going to come back. But then he had prostate cancer and died.
Yeah. So before we get you back to Fairbanks, I did want to ask you, because it sounds as if an assistant bishop would be an easy gig.
That's what he thought. That's exactly what he thought. Well, the Bishop of Michigan, Coleman McGee, and those two men, whenever they were in the House of Bishops at a meeting, and one would propose something, the other would second it. So they were really good people
to
work together. And so Bishop McGee just said, well, this is such a large diocese, you take that half and I'll take this half. So he ended up with more churches, not more miles than he had in Alaska, but more churches and people to care for than he had here.
But he didn't run dog teams to get there.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
He could get there and maybe be home at night. Yeah. And no, it was good choice, but I was glad to come back.
So
to Fairbanks.
why did you want to come back? Is this your home?
Yes. Well, Alaska is, I said, I grew up in Alaska. I was 20 when I came here, but I grew up here. And Point Hope was a lot of that. Fairbanks was a lot of that. I do love it. Well, I wanted to tell you, that was one of the things, that boat that Bishop Bentley left to Bill Gordon that he used for 2 years was the first boat that the Binkleys used. They bought it from the church. They bought the Godspeed from the church and started their riverboat excursion on that little boat. They enlarged so they put chairs out, and they had about 12 people, I guess. But anyway, that was good.
Well, we know that was a successful venture.
And then for our 50th wedding anniversary, let's see, when was I married? In 48, 98 there. I guess that was 90, I don't know. Anyway, for our 50th wedding anniversary, we celebrated it on the Binkley's riverboat. And I enjoyed that very much. And this is where this party comes in. We had a wonderful time on our 50th. Well, Bill was very sick. He had prostate cancer for something like 6 years. It had already gone to the bone. And the kids had thought, since we met on a steamship coming to Alaska, they would put us on the ferry from Seattle coming up to, I can't remember now where we're going. But anyway, we came to Alaska on the ferry, and he said when we got to Ketchikan is what it was. When we got there, he said, I can't go any further. I just can't make it. Well, he did make it, and we came to Fairbanks, and we had the celebration on the Binkley's boat. And then when we were leaving Fairbanks, we were going to stop in Anchorage and see people there. And we did. We flew to Anchorage. We got off the plane in Anchorage, and Bill had said, you know, that was so wonderful, but I'm sorry there was nobody there from the Arctic coast. That was too bad, too bad. So we're walking down in the airport in Anchorage, and we hear, Bishop, Bishop, Bishop. It was a whole group of people from Point Hope who were there singing and dancing. And it was so, and then what happened, of course, is what they do. I'm hugging Eunice Kawana, and she took off her party cover and put it on me, and I'm going to cry. Because that's the way they are. And this is, I'm proud of this. And it was Eunice Kawana. Oh, I have a story, another story. Is there time for another story?
Oh, yeah.
I have another story about Point Hope, because I had 4 years of Latin in high school, and I knew how to decline nouns. I knew how to conjugate verbs. I can learn to speak Eskimo. So I had this group of girls over one day, and I said to them, tell me the word in your language, and I don't know why I choose this word, don't ask me why. I said, what is the word for cute? Like that little girl is cute. And they gave me this word, and I practiced it, and it was fine. So when our interpreter came to visit, I said, Peel, I can speak an Eskimo word. And he said, well, what is it? And I said it. And he said, what did you say? I said it again. And he said, what did you say? And I said it again. Finally, he said, I don't know what you're trying to say, but you're saying the word for bowel movement. And I thought those little girls had played a trick on me. So I said, what is the word I want to say? He said it, and it was for all the world, just like the word I was saying, just like the other word. So I gave up. I never did learn Eskimo. There's some words you just can't escape, like alapa means it's cold. And it was cold a lot. In fact, the warmest temperature we had in Point Hope was 54 degrees. And it was much too hot to work. Really, really, yeah. No, I love Point Hope.
Yeah.
I love these people. Yeah.
And I've seen in a wonderful documentary about your life that you really loved traveling in the plane.
Oh, yeah.
With Bishop or Bill.
Yes, I do. Well, it's, well, you all love traveling, seeing Alaska, you know, and small
sometimes
plane
small
especially.
aircraft can be a little
plane.
more exciting than your standard big jet carrier.
Well, not all, yeah, it's a lot more exciting. You can see things. And Bill assured me that the plane could fly itself. I never did learn to land a plane, but some women do. But I didn't.
But that perspective of getting up above everything, and it's having done a little bit of it, it's you feel in this vast, you know, landscape and skyscape, and you're both insignificant but sort of wonderfully elevated. at the same time.
Yeah.
Is that what you felt?
I love it. I love flying. I miss it. Although the new bishop, he's been bishop for 12 years, but our present bishop, Mark Gnawa, has a plane now. He doesn't fly with it like Bill flew with it, but he did take me to Tanana a couple of months ago.
Nice.
In a single engine plane, and that was really exciting. Yeah, good. Yeah.
Well, given your deep connection with Alaska Native culture and the tradition of honoring elders, I think I'm pretty safe to say you're the eldest member in this room. I might be wrong, but I'm guessing at 99 you might be.
Probably. Was anybody going to confess to being older than I am? No.
Well, do you have any words of wisdom?
Yes.
Ah.
I thought you'd never ask.
Yeah, well.
Yes, I have words of wisdom. And they came to me, well, I decided about a year ago I was getting old. I just decided I'm probably getting old, especially since I'm losing my eyesight and my brain. But I have this word of wisdom for you all, and that is you have to keep laughing. It's not original with me. There are people that say it's the best medicine, but I wouldn't be here today. I'd be home in bed with the covers over my head if I couldn't laugh at myself. I do such foolish things, and I can't find anything. So keep laughing. Keep laughing. Yeah.
Great advice.
Wisdom, I'm calling it.
Okay. Wisdom. It has that patina, I think, yeah. Okay. Well, Shirley, traditionally in these events, I open to questions from the audience. And we've got a few people here who might have some memories to share of you. So I'm going to do that at this point.
Well, maybe you shouldn't. No, I'm sorry, I can't. Two reasons. One, I don't see well, and the other reason is I'm looking into the lights behind you. So if you know me and you tell me your name, I'd appreciate it.
And I'll
If
try
you
to
have
repeat
anything.
it for the audience watching online. Does anybody have a question or a reflection for? Yes.
I have a reflection. Shirley, this is Linda Anderson. And you just made a comment about aging, forgetfulness, and your brain. And I'm here to warn this audience, never accept an invitation with Shirley Gordon to play cards. You will lose and you will lose badly.
You opened a can of worms there, because
So you're a card shark?
I'm going to tell you, my dear departed mother and her identical twin sister taught me to play spite and malice. And so I have taught my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, my 4-year-old great-grandchild who had a brain tumor and surgery and radiation and was now getting chemo, and the doctor said, you need to stimulate his brain. He's 4 years old. Okay, I'm reading to him. I'm reading Bible stories to him, and he really loves those miserable, where people get hurt, but fighting, and he liked those stories. But I taught him to play spite and malice, and I would not let him win. And the kids thought that was very bad of me. But I don't think you learn anything that way if you're allowed to win every time when you can't win. So, and I don't win every time, no matter what Bonnie Gordon says. By the way, Bonnie Gordon is my daughter-in-law. I have 3 daughters and my son Bill. And my girls say that Bonnie is my favorite daughter. I don't have favorites, but if I did, she could well be the favorite. Yeah. But anyway, no, thanks for bringing that up, Linda.
I can see why there was domestic harmony in your household.
One thing I didn't, do we have time?
Sure.
I don't know what's happening. One thing I didn't tell you about with my birth, I was in the first grade and then the Great Depression hit. And my father was without work, so we went to live in a summer home of nieces of my mother, I think, in Oregon. And some river, I can't remember that now. But anyway, I was 6 years old, 7 years old. I had a wonderful time. Daddy was not working, he was home. Mother was making a wonderful garden. We had chickens. I didn't really like seeing her wring their heads off, but I liked eating it. And there were blackberries for pie. And my father made the original jigsaw puzzles. He took calendar pictures and pasted them on plywood and got his jigsaw out and made puzzles for us. And then we played a lot of cards. We played a lot of cards, we played a lot of board games, and I grew up playing cards is what I guess I'm getting at. And I just recently had to give up playing bridge because of my eyesight. But I haven't given up spite and malice yet.
Note to self, don't play it with you.
Yeah.
Any other reflections or questions?
Like somebody
So, sure, it's scary. So,
Okay.
I met young Bill, one of my dearest friends to this day, and we transferred to Denali when I was a third grader. And we lived in 3C3 Fairview Manor, which was a couple of blocks from the Bishop's house, right, north of Arctic Bowl now. And I spent most of my, when I wasn't in Fairview Manor, I spent it at Shirley and Bill's house. And there was a path between 3C3 and that house on the corner. So I found out what kind of mother Bill had and what we were dealing with. One night, we were 14 or 15, Bill and I, and this was all Bill's idea. The many people rotated through that house, left their Volkswagen Combi bus in the yard. And so Bill thought that it would be a good idea one night at about 4 a.m. to take that Combi out of the yard and just drive it around Fairbanks. And I didn't think that was very good, but I did. So we thought we got away with it. So a few days later, Bill relates, God, I got caught. What happened? The person came back to get the Combi, and they said, somebody's been driving it. And of course, Shirley didn't know. Bill shut up. And so Bill feigns ignorance. And so this is what happened. Well, how do you know? Well, Shirley goes out to the yard, and she gets to the Combi, and she can see where we drove out of the yard, through the trees, onto the street, and the scratches down the side where the trees hit it. So of course, when Shirley confronts her son with that, then Bill had to cave in. So at that time, Shirley brought a whole new meaning to the words, Bill, just wait till your father gets home.
Yeah.
And many of us have, of course, my mother, your mother, but I had two other mothers, and one was Shirley Gordon. Yeah.
Shall I tell the story on you? I love this story. You don't mind? You don't mind? No. Well, we had a bedroom just off the kitchen in the downstairs, and it was Billy's bedroom for a while. So Gary comes in the house. Well, the house was never locked in those days. You didn't lock houses in Fairbanks. He came in through the kitchen and jumped on the bed to Billy. It was my mother and father. I love that story, and they loved it too. They loved it too. But the kids were always giving up their bedrooms to somebody who was spending the night. So anyway, that was a good story. Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, I sent Billy off to boarding school. You remember that, don't you? Yeah. Oh, I'm supposed to say he's a good boy. He told me that I should tell everybody that his son is a very fine boy. He is. I'm proud of him. And if you see the statue in honor of Walter Harper, you can thank my son for that.
Bill and Bonnie aren't here tonight.
They have COVID.
They had such a busy week last week with lots of people doing the Harper thing. And so they got a little bug, and so they're watching tonight.
Yeah.
And it's too bad they couldn't be here, but
I
they're here in
know.
spirit.
And
Hear
Penny
about
too.
COVID.
Yeah.
Penny.
Penny also, yeah. I had four. I'm going to tell you something. When Michelle suggested that I do this, I said to her, "You don't want me. I'm a college dropout. I've never had a career. I have nothing to offer anybody." And now I'm here to tell you I'm a huge success. Because what I wanted in life was to marry a man who didn't drink alcohol and to have children. And I have 4 wonderful children. And not only 4 wonderful children, I have 22 great-grands, all of them wonderful. So doesn't that make me a success?
Well, Shirley, I can't think of a better way to end the evening than that.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you
Well,
so
I'm
much.
sorry, it's over.
We're just getting started. There's another hour or two,
Yeah.
so we'll just have an intermission here.
Okay.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley Gordon.
Well, thank you.